Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great weekend. Our library tour is continuing, our shelfie safari, and you might be thinking to yourself at this point, Jack, you don't look like you're dressed for a safari, and I don't. Because, my friends, you have to dress the part. And in this video, we are going to be looking at highbrow literature, books that people have written doctoral theses on. In fact, some of these books might even have the doctoral thesis in them. These are real heavy books that people dive deep into, specifically with these editions. I'll be perfectly honest, this room should probably be filled with pipe smoke right now with the books that we're about to look at. And I would have considered that if it wouldn't have been for the, fire hazard involving all these great books. So I wanted to dress the part for these. We've got some eminent Victorian novelists. We have a novelist who was sort of Victorian adjacent, wished he was Victorian. We have some great poetry, some miscellaneous works, a couple of great dramatic works. So let's dive in to the Norton critical editions. These are fantastic. If there's a book you love and there's a Norton critical edition, I highly recommend picking it up because it's sort of like the director's cut feature of the book. These books are great because you get the text, which is the whole point, is that you get the text. But you also get usually two other sections. One is called background, the other is called criticism. The background is my favorite of the bonus features because frequently that involves a couple of things. It involves sort of source material for the work, perhaps nonfiction, perhaps an earlier fictional work, or a myth that is referenced and used to build out the plot or the theme of that work. It might be letters from the writer, it might be critical essays by the writer, comments, reaction to criticism from the writer. So that's interesting. The text also includes like little annotation around textual revisions. Are there updates from a first to a third revised edition by the author? Those are all identified, but for me the backgrounds are always the great sort of bonus feature to a text that I love. The criticism is interesting because sometimes it is criticism around that specific work, sometimes it is criticism of, on the writer as a whole, sometimes it is criticism around a very specific theme or character within the work, and so those are great. One of those Victorian novelists would be Thomas Hardy. Far from the Madding Crowd is an early work from Hardy. It's not my favorite of his works. I think Bathsheba is a very interesting character. Gabriel Oak is interesting, but beyond that, I don't know. The other characters that fill the work just don't quite feel as real as some of Hardy's later works would be. But of course, Hardy's Wessex is an incredible place to spend time. And another thing I just love on the Norton critical editions, and we'll see, I'll hold up another one as comparison, the old school ones that have the great like single color and then the classic like bold lettering, I think these are just wonderful covers. I love these. A later work from Hardy, and possibly my favorite, I think the next one we'll look at is probably my favorite, but a very strong work in my reading is Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a book that examines concepts of class, that specifically examines what life was like for a rural Victorian woman who was not wealthy, who was not from a family of name, who didn't have a manor, who didn't have an estate, who didn't have an income to draw on, who wasn't protected by Victorian society and the Victorian order. Towards the end, they end up in a place of monoliths, not unlike Stonehenge. This specific edition is the one to get because this is the one that has critical essays from both D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf. A later edition dispensed with those. What? But I enjoy this book. This is probably my favorite, Return of the Native. Again, great weird cover, beautiful color, and this is a strong one. I think this Return of the Native takes the ideas around marriage, the ideas around sort of naturalism and romanticism fusing together, the ideals of high romanticism, the ideas of the burgeoning naturalism that was occurring in literature, and Hardy I think fuses them together better in Return of the Native than in his other works. And then Mayor of Casterbridge, a book that shows that it was serialized. Cool little picture, I believe, of Salisbury Cathedral in here. Casterbridge in Hardy's Wessex. I don't have a copy of Jude the Obscure. I'm not a fan of that work. Now, let's dive into some poetry. Let's make it a little twist. I mean, I'm wearing a bow tie after all. So we have Middle English lyrics. What is Middle English? Well, Middle English is not Elizabethan English. It is not Shakespearean English, that we're familiar with when we read Shakespeare in school. Middle English predates that. It's what Chaucer was writing in. It's what the Gawain poet was writing in. And so Middle English can be significantly more challenging than Elizabethan English to read. But it really is, I don't want that to sound like it's a barrier. I encourage readers, especially readers who enjoy poetry, really enjoy poetry, to dig in and try to find some of the original Middle English versions of different works, whether it's the Canterbury Tales, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the different lyrics in here. Many of them are spiritual, but others aren't. There were people writing really fun songs and ballads, or really fun and interesting spiritual songs in Middle English. And so this edition groups a great number of those, not the major, Chaucer and Gawain poet works, but others that were important and useful. So this is a great little book. Then we have Ben Jonson and the Cavalier Poets. I like to consider this sort of like a real touchstone in my aesthetic. The poetry from Ben Jonson that we get in here is the best Ben Jonson poetry. You don't need a collected Ben Jonson, in my personal reading. But there are a lot of great, great poets in here. Just a quick list. Who do we have? Robert Herrick, Richard Corbett, Thomas Crewe, Sir John Suckling, Sidney Godolphin, Richard Lovelace, Henry Vaughan, Thomas Stanley. There are some really excellent poets in here. Poets who... There's a life to this poetry that is really quite amazing. And this is one that I just love the anthology. I don't frequently go back to the background or criticism in this one. I just love this anthology. George Herbert and the 17th century religious poets. So George Herbert, Andrew Marvell is in here, and he's one of my all-time favorite poets. Thomas Traherne and Henry Vaughan. But then Richard Crashaw, really, really important poet, who can feel very formal and very precise, but creates some truly wonderful poetry. And this is a volume I was reading last year and really enjoyed. Blake's Poetry and Designs. A highlight of this is, of course, the criticism on Blake, but also color illustrations of the plates. Leaves of Grass from Walt Whitman. Fantastic. Of course, the text of Leaves of Grass is so important, but there's also just so many wonderful sort of ideas around his poetry, ways to read his poetry, interpret his poetry, themes that exist across his poetry that we don't always identify, because there's so much of Whitman's poetry and so much of it is good. His poetry is a force that we can just get lost in. So let's dive in then to another one of those Victorian novelists. This one will be our pseudo-Victorian novelist. And that's because I think Henry James deeply wishes that he was a Victorian. I picked these up when I was 21, 22. Every single one of these when I was 21, 22. And I'm not the biggest Henry James fan. The Wings of the Dove, it's interesting to a certain degree, but it's overwritten like so much of James. He takes interesting ideas, interesting relationship conflicts. He puts them in an interesting place, Venice. Really cool places, and then he just overwrites it, and that's what I see happening in The Wings of the Dove. The Ambassadors, this whole question, this feels almost autobiographical for James, the idea of somebody going to Europe and then, wanting to be the American in Europe and then realizing that maybe the person just wants to be a former American, now European. I have not read The Portrait of a Lady. It's supposed to be excellent. I just have not made a choice to read Henri James. And then The American, an earlier work, one that seems to have a little bit more energy to it. One that I don't think was revised quite as heavily as some of his other works later on. Let's see, we'll dive into our drama. So we have Henry IV Part 1 by William Shakespeare. I love this play. I love Hotspur at one point. Hotspur's great final monologue, time of life is short. If life did ride upon a dot's point. Love that. So that's why I have this edition. If they had I don't think there's a Henry IV Part 2, and I really read those plays as one continuous work. As much as I love Hotspur, the ultimate rejection of Falstaff at the end by Prince Hal, now King Henry V, is horrifyingly emotional, and just feels so authentic. But if there is a Norton critical Henry IV Part 2, please let me know. The Wild Deck by Ibsen, possibly the least favorite of the Ibsen plays I've read. But I will say that the backgrounds and criticism in this edition do help me appreciate what he's trying to do. I just don't enjoy the play. And I like Ibsen quite a bit. Ibsen is a fantastic dramatist. I really enjoy his works, but The Wild Duck is just not one for me, I would say. And then Modern Irish Drama, and you'll notice this is now sort of a new type of cover. The color's a little different. I can contrast that with the Americans. But the spines are pretty similar, but the covers are a little different now. Not as weird as they're about to get. And this is a great one. It collects Lady Gregory, W.B. Yeats, John Millington Synge, the Playboy of the Western World, another aesthetic touchstone for Rambling Raconteur, George Bernard Shaw, Sean O'Casey, Brendan Behan, Samuel Beckett, and Brian Friel. And then the different sort of backgrounds and criticism on these are great. So many of them focus on the writer as a whole and then narrow down to the more specific plays that are in the volume. All right, now for the miscellaneous. So I have the writings of St. Paul. So these are the different letters from St. Paul, or attributed to St. Paul within the New Testament. The sort of background and responses in these are fantastic. Many of them are from sort of early church fathers, and then up through the 19th century and into the middle of the 20th century. So this is a really great edition. The Decameron by Boccaccio, again, this dates from when I was in college. I have a different edition of Boccaccio that I prefer now. The highlight of this would be the different bits around Petrarch. Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë, a book that I enjoy quite a bit and my wife enjoys quite a bit. She's reread. This is a book she has reread more frequently than I have. In fact, this specific edition she has reread more frequently than I have. The absolutely fantastic Wide Sargasso Sea, a book that I think feels more and more vital with every passing year, and almost the perfect window into looking at the shadows that lie in those great Victorian novels that so many people love. This is a great insight into starting to think about that world from some other perspectives. Then, of course, Norton started to... They kept the spines cool, and then they went with these full-color spines. The Classic Fairy Tales is a great volume. It is edited by Maria Tatar, and she just provides enormous scholarship. What's great about these is they take certain fairy tale types, Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella, Snow White, and Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, and then they show she shows different versions of that, not just in Western civilization or European tales, but sometimes comparing the tale types to those found in other cultures, usually specifically Eastern Asia. But this is a fantastic, fantastic book, one I love dipping in and out of. Daniel Defoe's A Journal of Plague Year. I bought this in either January or February of I think it was January of 2020. I have not read it yet. And then Rousseau's political writings. So On the Origin of Inequality, Discourse on Political Economy, On the Social Contract. So this is an interesting part of Rousseau. I think probably the most frequently read parts of Rousseau, not, of course, his great Confessions, which is my favorite Rousseau. Now, those books are bracketed. All of those great Norton critical editions are bracketed by my complete set of the Palliser novels and the great little Oxford hardback, which has neat illustrations and also little stars to tell which volume of the Palliser novels they are. I found these on this great discount the week my youngest brother got married. And I was looking for something, and I found this whole set of these, and each one they were either 99 cents or $1.99. So I got the whole set. But we of course have Can You Forgive Her, Phineas Finn, the Eustace Diamonds, and then moving forward, Phineas Redux. Is this the point at which Redux became like cool to use? Do we have to thank Trollope for that? The Prime Minister and the Duke's Children. So, of course, these were the Norton critical editions, and then I bookend those on the shelf. It's a shelf in our hallway. With those are bookended by 3 and 3 of the Oxford editions of the Palliser novels from Trollope. So, let me know. Let me know if any of these are favorites from yours. Let me know if you're a fan of Middle English. I'm looking for more. We've got to drum this up. And I hope you're having a great week. Thanks, everybody.